Hi, it's Jamie with Trapunto. Welcome to month one of the Queen of Diamonds block of the month. In this video, I will be sharing how I'm cutting my blocks so you can follow along if you like, and let's get started. Alrighty, so this is everything that I need for block 1-1. I have the pattern that I designed here and the fabrics that will go in this design. Then I also have my paper pieces, my template, my rotary cutter, and a ruler and a little black marker, and I'll show you what those are for. I'm going to move my pattern out of the way. So this block only has 3 different shapes, which is nice, but there is a little bit of fussy cutting that needs to be done with the stripes. And fussy cutting stripes is pretty straightforward one way, and then it might be a little on the other way. So let me show you what I plan to do with this. I'll do the fussy cutting first and then the other shapes next, just because I think the fussy cutting might be more interesting. So I have a couple blocks that need stripes, these 2 stripes here. And the green, or I guess these are yellow and gray stripes, are going to go vertically through the shape. Now, I know there's a little bit of reflection with my light. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So the stripes need to go vertically through the shape, whereas if you're fussy cutting horizontally, it's a little easier because you can just basically line up with the stripe and fussy cut that way. So what I plan to do with this one, I just want to get my fabric ready here. Okay, so what I'm planning to do is find the middle of my shape. And so I have my little ruler here, is right here, and it's like 1 tick less. So I'm going to aim for kind of the middle of the text, and I believe the B is going to be in the middle. So I'm going to call this my middle. And we're going to line up. I'm going to call that my middle. Okay, so now that I have the line marked, I can have a little bit of the selvage in here because that's just going to be on the seam allowance anyway. So that looks pretty good to me. I guess the only thing is I do have a teeny tiny little bit of stripe here and nothing over here. So, I mean, maybe my middle is more like that. If you want to get super picky. So I guess for future reference, I'll just try to remember that the not on the line, but just a little bit over the line. So that looks good to me. And then I just take my little rotary cutter and cut around my shape. And you do obviously want to be careful doing this because it is still a rotary cutter. It can still hurt you. And who didn't want to come away? There we go. And then I have 1 shape. And for this block, I need 2. So I'm going to flip my template like this. And line up again. I'm just watching the stripes either side to see how they're lining up. And that looks pretty good to me. I'm just going to move up a little tiny bit. And let me cut again. So I'm just going to leave this little bit instead of just cutting that off because it'll be basted down anyway. I am going to just trim this little tail though. And there is our second shape. And when you're basting, you can similarly draw your center line and then just make sure that it's lined up. But I should also be able to kind of just judge by like these two lines right here lining up with the top of my paper. And I would be pretty satisfied with that. So since we're here, why don't we baste these guys? And I wouldn't worry too much about like having more seam allowance one side or the other because that doesn't necessarily matter too much. So I'm going to baste. Whoop. And as I showed in my basting shapes video, I want these points to go down. So I'm going to baste this first. Oh dear. There we go. So I'm going to baste this first because as I baste my sides, you'll see that it'll point down. And I would like them to nest. Good grief, these glue sticks. They've been sitting for, it's a new stick, but they've been sitting for a little bit, so maybe they're just a little dry. I'll just do the other side carefully here. And I want these to nest because the shape that they go with is another one of these. So they'll go like this. So if these nest, then when I'm basting these shapes, I'll have the points go the other way, just so they're not conflicting. And that's also the nice thing about fussy cutting and having a larger seam allowance. So the templates that I'm working with are 3/8 of an inch. It just gives you a little bit more room to play with. So I'm basically matching it up to have these stripes at the points here. Whereas if I put this template right in the middle, and I think this is the one that I had a little extra, you can see that they're not gonna match quite the same. But since I have a larger seam allowance, I can shift this over and go from there. I just have to make sure that it's straight or my stripes will be at a little bit of an angle, but so long as you line up with like the bottom, you should be fine. So this shape, or not shape, this block is supposed to be greens and teals. So I know that this stripe doesn't really kind of match with that, but I hope to make up for that in the other fussy cutting that I plan to do, which I will of course show you. And I don't know if I mentioned in my intro video, but I will show you the fabric that is going to be my border for all my blocks as well. And I hope to fussy cut those to make it also a little bit more coherent for the color story that I want. So there's our two stripes, and they match up pretty well. All right, so before I forget, we're gonna cut the skunks. And for this block, I'm actually not going to use any of the skunks at all, because what I want to focus on is getting the green and teal that is in the flower part. So let's see. So these are scraps that I have from like 3 other projects that I've done with line work at this point. Yeah. Okay, so and I don't really want to waste a bunch of fabric, but I don't really want to necessarily have the tail in there, even though it's not a huge deal. So I'd like to have more of like this green and teal color in there if possible. So maybe something like that looks kind of nice. And then how this works is it's going to butt up like this. And I think that's okay. What happens if we do something more like this? Because then I'm not wasting as much. I'm not really mad at that. Okay, let's go with this because I do get a bunch of the color in there. Okay, so one thing that you might want to consider when you're fussy cutting is something called a tension point. Now, in photography, a tension point is an area of imbalanced or conflict that creates visual interest. It might create unease or a sense of anticipation. Again, that's photography, but when you look at also in design, there might come a time when you have here, for example, on the tip of this flower that you can hopefully see that's not reflected, is potentially what you could consider a tension point if it gets too close to the side. All it really means, it talks to the concept of creating something that's dynamic and engaging rather than calm and harmonious. Note my air quotes. So if I were to avoid this tension point, I would bring it in further from the edge. Or if you wanted to create more of a tension point, you could put it closer to the edge because, oh, it's just touching and, it might just go over. Uh, I haven't thought about tension points in a really long time, but like this could also be maybe considered a tension point where it's just peeking out. Like there's a little bit, ooh, like what's going on over there? Anyway, I don't know how prevalent tension points are in quilting. Something to consider. I like tension points. I think it can add a little bit of interest and things like that. I could go into design all day long if you really wanted me to. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just stick to my guns because I want the blue and the tealies and the greenies in this block. And I get a little bit of all that kind of throughout what I'm trying to do here. And, I can even just tilt it just a little bit to get a little bit more of that vine in here and things like that. So I'm dithering, but I hope you get the point of what I'm trying to say. And also this here is also why having a large seam allowance is nice because my fabric goes just under the seam here, but that's not going to be a big deal once we get basted and sewing. So I really wouldn't concern yourself too, like I wouldn't get, let me lock my thing. I wouldn't get too close, especially on a corner. But if I go even a quarter, that's really not a big deal. So I'm gonna cut this here. And this is also where rotating cutting mats are handy. Oops, missed a little bit here. Because you can, of course, rotate your shape as you're cutting it out. Now, as I mentioned, I want these points to go up when I've basted them, so I'm going to baste it last. And this could be where a light table is really helpful too, because if you really want to make sure that all the elements that you just cut out and you want featured in your block, you could have your light table shining through on your fabric and you would be able to see it through on your paper. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and kind of get a feel for where my ends are here. And I think I'm happy with that. So in school, I don't know, we talked about tension points, and it was sort of something that was kind of discouraged in a way. I guess there's, okay, it's art, so there's no right or wrong way, but I will just say that there is I guess, a right or wrong way to do tension points, because the thing with tension points is it can be really distracting from your piece as well. So it could be something that is just constantly drawing the eye, like to that corner, to that side of the piece, or say your quilt block. So when you're looking at tension points or just the design of your pieces overall, it's something to consider. As I said, I like tension points just because, I don't know, it adds a little bit of je ne sais quoi. So I have my two pieces, so they're in the block, they're going to nest like this. And you can see on the back with my basting, one is going to nest quite nicely with the other, and I am happy to have like no yellow in this versus yellow here, so there's no sort of color twinning or whatever you want to call it. So there's those. Let's do the second one. Now I do have this piece left. However, I don't have any of the colors that I want in here. So we're going to save this scrap for another day. And I'm going to see what I can get out of this, which is a much larger piece. But as you can see, I have played with it already. However, I do have some teals and blue kind of in here. So let's see what we can get. And this, again, is where having templates is quite nice, because you can float around on the fabric. I'm going to zoom out a tiny bit here. You can see my lovely space. So I don't really want to go here because I have a lot more black than blue. And of course, that's exactly where my reflection is on this light. So hopefully you can kind of see. I'm going to have to figure this out. So hopefully you can kind of see that in here there's more teal, but if I place my thing here, I get a lot more black. And I don't really want to do that. So what can we get up here? And again, more black than I really want. And here, of course, won't work because you might be able to see that I have a hole, and that's not going to work. What happens if we flip? So what might end up happening here, unless I can get, yeah, I don't think I can get anything out of this, unfortunately. At least this spot. So let's open it up a little bit more and see what we can get. So we have all this to work with here. And I really kind of want to go in here. So, ooh, that's quite nice. I really like how this leaf lines up with the corner there. And then if we can just a little tiny bit, we can get blue here, and then there's some green and teals throughout. I quite like that. All right, that's the one. And this is where the Swiss cheesing comes in with your fabric. So all right. Beauty. And now let's do the other stripes. So these stripes go horizontal through the shape. These ones are also very difficult on the eye. But the nice thing is that it goes horizontal through the shape, which is going to be this huge diamond. And I know that these stripes are not straight like these guys. However, you should still be able to fussy cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically lining up the edge of my seam allowance and taking away one of the black stripes. And then that leaves me with a nice little fussy cut. And I'm just going to move it up a little bit. And most of my seam allowance on this side is the selvage, but as I mentioned, that really doesn't matter. So there's one. Oops. The nice thing too about templates is you can use them like cookie cutters. So as you can see with how I am cutting my shapes, I'm trying to waste as little fabric as I possibly can. And I find that the templates do help with that. Okay, so these stripes are supposed to go. Oh, dang. Okay. Wait, what? So like this. And then the other one. Oh. So the other one is supposed to go like that, but we need the stripes to be going like burp, burp. So this one can live like this. So we have these two. Oh my god, we have these two. Okay, so we have these two. And now I need to cut the stripes to go that way and that way. So I think if we flip, yeah, because we need them to go like this. And now I need to, because it was like this, so I'm going to need to cut like that. And how I'm going to do that is just basically the same as I did before, if possible. This is a little too much brain power, I think. Just make sure that my seam allowance is still fine. And this is something you can also fix when you're basting as well. If you're just a little off, you can always just shift the paper over. It doesn't have to be super duper ultra perfect with the templates. Okay. So now we should have stripe going this way, stripe going this way. a stripe going this way. And then we need one more stripe going up here. So there's my 4 diamonds. And then with the polka dots, one thing I want to watch is how the polka dots look in the shape. So I need these. So it's kind of like, do you want your polka dots going, you know, this way? Or are you okay if they go like this way? And for me personally, they just look off kilter. So, and they look more like in a grid this way for whatever reason. So when I'm looking to line them up on the grid, I want to make sure, I think that I have one in the middle, like up here. So I'm just going to shift it over. And even if they're not all fussy cut, I think so long as they're going the same way, that will be okay. And if you look, so I have one in the middle, and my tape is a little off, so it's whatever. But I can get one in the middle, and then I can just get down here. But I don't think I want a line of dots right at the edge of my piece, because it's going to look, actually a skunk goes here. So it's going to look like this. And going back to tension point, I think this creates a little bit of conflict. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit, get rid of that line. And now there's a little bit of breathing space. So I still have the dot in the top here, but then I have some breathing space, and I still have that nice sort of polka dot look without it becoming a grid, if that makes sense. So I think I'm good with that. And since I need 6 of them, I don't think I can really fussy cut that. So I'm just going to cut out the 6 that I need and I'm not going to do precision fussy cutting or anything like that. I'm just going to eyeball it. So there's one. Oops. And then using this one as an example, I'm going to go line up here. And again, I don't want that line that's happening here. So I'm going to move it something like that. Now with these, you need to be careful, because since they're equal on all sides, it can be a little tricky to, I guess, remember that they do have like a right side up kind of thing. So one thing you could do after you're done basting, because this is my top, and when you're basting, you want to make sure that you are covering that line that I don't want, or not covering that line with your paper. So it's going to be something like this. So you could say this is my top, so you draw an arrow with top, or let me just get this in here. I'm going to show you what I mean by that grid again. So it's going to go like this, but then if I turn it, can you see how the dots just look kind of funny? So that could be another way to remember, is like the side with 2 tails goes down, or it just doesn't look like polka dots anymore. To me, it looks like lines, and I find that a little weird. Same with this way. So like I said, on the back, you could write top with an arrow, or, you know, both ears go down kind of thing. So I think this block is coming along quite nicely. So now it's going to look, this is the first little bit. So what I'm going to do, this video is drawn on quite a lot. Hopefully I'll be able to cut some out. I'm going to finish cutting and basting, and then I'll show you the finished block before I've sewn it. Time for the grand reveal. So this was my blueprint that I designed for block 1-1, and here are all my basted pieces. So one thing that I'm a little conflicted with is just the contrast between these two. It's a very light polka dot and a very light gray. I think it'll be okay in the long run. I also mentioned what I plan to border all my pieces with, and that is going to be the fairy dust on white. And you can buy papers and templates for it, which I have done. I feel like that might have been a little insane to do because this is a long seam. However, what I plan to do either way is I'm going to fussy cut the seams to, I guess, majority match the color story for each block. So this block is supposed to be greens and teals. So I hope with the long template that I can cut, like fussy cut somewhere in here to just keep the colors what I want them to be. So we'll see how it goes. This is, as I said, block 1-1. It looks a little discombobulated because obviously nothing is stitched together. However, I'm looking forward to seeing how this project comes together. And join me in the next video when I cut and baste block 1-2. Thanks so much. Bye.